What's up, y'all? Coast to Coast podcast from inside Carolina. I am Joey Powell. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt Incongruity, and we're glad that you're here. We're going to do this live again tonight. I want to give a big shout out to Justin Jackson for joining us last week. Tar Heels, uh, All American, spent some time with us to preview the Maui field, which I don't think went the way any of us expected it to go. Not just from the Tar Heels perspective, but the fact that the last place team was the 17 game winning streak holding defending two-time national champion Yukon Huskies, and their whiny little of a coach had to get swept on out of there. And I would say I hated to see that, but I'd be lying to you, and I generally try not to do that here on the Coast to Coast podcast. We are glad that you are with us. Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan have joined me as usual. Those are the two guys that are going to bring you all the news that you need to know. What we're going to do tonight, we're going to break down a little bit of the Maui Invitational, talk about what we saw, what we liked, a lot of things that are concerning, I think, on a lot of UNC fans' minds. So we'll try to parse through that as best as we're able, and we'll look forward to Alabama come to town this Wednesday as part of the ACC SEC basketball mashup or whatever they want to call it. So it should be a pretty exciting week, if nothing else. But first things first, Sherrell, give me some recruiting goodness, my man.
Yeah, so holiday tournaments kind of kicked off this weekend with it being Thanksgiving. The main one of notice for people who follow UNC was Holiday Hoopsgiving down in Atlanta. The event, I remember when it started, it has grown kind of exponentially, and I have a college component to it as well. But Isaiah Dennis and Caleb Wilson, their high schools, Davidson Day and Holy Innocents, they didn't play each other, but they were in the tournament. And a lot of the national guys were down there. Got to see Isaiah Dennis for the first time since July. And got to see Caleb Wilson as well. Travis had a nice little write up on Dennis, who did lead his team to a win against a team that had some ranked guards. He seemed pretty impressed with Dennis, and I think that's something that could be a theme moving forward, especially with his improved ball handling. And then, everybody usually comes back and impressed with Caleb Wilson. I think one of the things this time was that he didn't shoot it quite as well as he has in the past. And the big news, I think, from the event was that when Wilson was interviewed, he obviously has the top five. We have told you that the list within a list is a kind of a top three, and he mentioned cutting down even to a top two and said that he kind of had a leader in mind but didn't name who that was. And he hopes to make a decision, as he's been saying, between mid-December and mid-January. So nothing particularly new there other than him kind of admitting that maybe one school is a little bit out front and that he might cut to two.
Well, that's your update, and that's one of the reasons why this is your favorite podcast. Sherrell bringing the heat with the recruiting stuff as usual. As things develop, we will keep you apprised. Sherrell usually gives a really good write-up on Inside Carolina premium message boards. Make sure you guys are subscribed there. If you are not a premium member, I don't even know what you're doing with your life right now. North Carolina football in the middle of a coaching search, all sorts of stories behind that. And I don't mind breaking news here on the show tonight. Regarding UNC's football coaching search, I can break this news here on the Coast to Coast podcast on December the 1st as we're doing this live. Sherrell McMillan, not a candidate for the UNC head coaching football job. So I just want to go ahead and get that out there. But Sean, I want to ask you as well. I saw what Travis said about Mr. Dennis, and I do think that, we may have said this when we previewed him a little bit. I do think that his frame, if he can put on some weight, might lend him to having probably the most NBA ready body of any of the non-post players that North Carolina is after. How do you feel about that?
Well, even if it's non-NBA ready, I mean, it does go to a lot of the weaknesses I think we're seeing of this team in terms of the size and the length. So at the very least, it does provide, at the 6'4", 6'5" height and the length that he does have, size at the guard position, whether that's the one or the two. But yeah, I mean, you look at a 6'5" guard that can handle the ball, so that equates to the NBA size. You can look at a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder that they're not going to draft anybody under 6'4", for instance, and you can see how they're playing, and in large part they don't want to have the mismatches in the playoffs. So, I think part of what we're seeing from some other opponents in college is the size, and just having Dennis at that 6'4", 6'5" length, I think will be beneficial as UNC looks to continue to build a team for next year and the years beyond.
Well, let's segue now into this current team of Tar Heels. I think we said here on this show, we were talking with Justin last week, but we had talked about it as well, that 3-1 would have been a successful trip for the Tar Heels, and instead they come back 2-2. I think what you saw was what will probably end up being a quad one win against Dayton. Tar Heels came back from a gaggle of points down to win that game, and looked very good doing it despite the way they started. Came out flat again against Auburn, who, having seen just about everybody in the top 10 so far this year, I think Auburn might be the best team in the country. They will be going to Duke this week, playing right after Carolina and Alabama will match up in the ACC-SEC Challenge. So that'll be another matchup to watch. And then Tar Heels again kind of dig themselves another hole against Michigan State, come back, take a lead, send the game to overtime, and just can't really close it out. Give me your major takeaways from that tournament, Sean. I think there's a lot to pick from. What was the first thing I think that surprised you when you saw the way North Carolina played in Maui?
Well,
Sniper? I think Sean got sniped. Sherrell, you still there?
That seems like that would have been an amazing point. He said well,
Yeah.
and then
He said and then stopped. So
I'm
maybe
sure
there
it
was
was-
nothing. There was
I'm
nothing
sure it
good
was
to talk
fire.
about.
Yeah. So for me, I was so I think coming into the preseason and into the season, everybody to a man said, the big question is, what is UNC going to do inside? How can they handle other bigs? How can they score in the post? Even though it was going to look different, they were going to push tempo. That was kind of the storyline, really the only storyline, to be honest. And I think when that happened, we were like, I think the coaching staff was like, well, they can work around it. Those guys will bow up. They'll play well. But you're 7 games into the season now, and the production just isn't there from the big men. So whatever plans you had in the preseason, I think you have to, and this isn't being alarmist, but I do think you have to kind of rip those up and say, this isn't working. Not sure if it's going to work moving forward. You have a pretty good sample size against, teams who aren't great, who Carolina's more gifted than, teams who are kind of equal in talent to UNC, and then teams who maybe have more talent, and it just isn't working. So you get home Friday from Hawaii. You've got a few days of practice. You've got a game Wednesday. You've got a game Saturday. Then you get some more time off. What can you come up with as a coaching staff to say this is the path to move forward? Because it's clear, I think, right now that what they're doing just isn't working, and it's hurting the team. I mean, really just from a defensive standpoint, I mean, the offense is still humming despite the fact they're getting almost no production from the post. So that was a long way of saying I think my biggest takeaway is that 7 games in, 20%, of the regular season done. It just the plan they had for the bigs coming into the season isn't working, and they're going to have to change, and they're going to have to pivot.
All right, Sean, I know you had some absolute fire that was coming out, and the internet just couldn't handle it. I'm going to ask you a little bit different question since Sherrell kind of jumped in and picked up the slack. I saw a team on defense that was disconnected. I saw a team on defense that was struggling at times. And I'm not going to call out any player by name, but some of the upperclassmen were literally in the post, neither guarding ball or helping off. They were just kind of in no man's land. And I don't think that's something we expected to be a problem. I think we did worry about rebounding, and rightfully so. We did worry a good bit about post scoring, which Sherrell just mentioned a little bit. But this defense issue that I've seen, again, specifically around connectivity, whether it's guys talking, whether it's guys not trusting, where their teammates are going to be, I'm seeing issues on the defense that I did not expect to see from a team that has as many veteran players as North Carolina has. How do you feel? Is that going to be something they deal with all year, or do you feel like that's something they can actually work through?
Hopefully it's something they can actually work through. I think that what you bring up is exactly. And being in Maui, I was sitting right behind the basket where UNC was playing defense the second half, all three games. So I really got to see that, unfortunately, up close. And part of that, sometimes they're switching all screens, other times they're switching on the guards. Sometimes one person is expecting a switch, or maybe they're not fighting through, and then it puts somebody else in a bad position. But going to the Auburn game, you could see just from a preparedness perspective, Auburn knew exactly where they wanted to go, how they wanted to do it, and UNC, after 5-10 seconds, they're going to be running around, trying to they're scrambling to get to the ball. So what you saw in terms of connectivity, I think is a great observation. Hopefully it is something, because I went back to last year, some of the games, just to say, hey, what was this defense doing? And you do see Cormac Ryan, who, somebody might score on him, but he's gonna try his hardest to get through that ball screen. He's not just gonna, hey, you guard him, I'm gonna switch. He's trying to get over it, under it, through it, whatever it is. And I do think the team needs more of that ownership in terms of, hey, this is my man. I'm not going to let them beat me one-on-one. But given how often the ball screens or back screens are being set, I think it's fine to switch maybe once or twice. It confuses the offense, which it did Michigan State maybe the first time. But then I think it allows you to play a little more relaxed than you need to. So I do think trying to take more ownership of your man to get through the screens, whether that's over, under, etc. I think we knew the freshmen were going to take a little while, and you could see whether it was Drake Powell, wasn't fully maybe sure of where he needed to be or what his role was, and then you go down to Ian, who was pretty lost on the defensive end. I think he was, trying hard, but he just, from a play perspective, wasn't there. So I do think it comes down to talking. I have one play in my head in the Michigan State game where Drake was chasing on the baselines, and all of a sudden a switch got called, and it got called late, so he had to fly out to the three-pointer in the corner. They made it. He was the one that looked bad, but was it his fault that he was trying to get through the screen, or RJ's fault that he called the screen too late, or the switch too late? So I think really owning up and guarding the ball, and once again, I think really just being focused on your man, getting through the screens, and taking pride in what they're doing, because you didn't really see that come out in those 3 games in Maui.
And back to the question of, like, can they improve? Like, yeah, they can improve. You look at last year, obviously they had Armando Bacot in the middle, but through, let's say, before Christmas, they gave up 83 points to Villanova, 87 to UConn, and 87 to Kentucky. And I think that was when Hubert Davis kind of had the come to Jesus meeting with Harrison Ingram about rebounding, about defensive intensity. And after that, they didn't, obviously the competition wasn't as great, but they didn't give up 70 points again until almost February. So a good full month, they went from not giving up 70 points after that date. Now this year, they've given up 92 to Kansas, 85 to Auburn, and 94 to Michigan State in overtime. So it's the schedule actually looks pretty similar, to be honest, with the KenPom rankings and the points given up, and now they've got a big, huge game against a top-ranked SEC opponent coming into the Smith Center. So, like, all that is kind of matching up. Again, the personnel was different, but I think one thing we can give Hubert Davis the benefit of the doubt with is that his team generally, as a whole, over the course of the season, plays pretty solid defense. It's going to be different. It's probably going to be excruciating for guys like Drake Powell and Ian Jackson and Seth Trimble. They're going to play themselves to exhaustion because of the style they're going to have to play, which is very helter-skelter, lots of doubling, getting down on the boards because of, I guess the inability of the bigs at the moment to play solid defense. So I think it can get better. It's just going to be a little more challenging than it was in previous years because you don't have that big guy like, Bacot in the middle.
So I don't want to belabor the defensive point, but I think it's suffice to say there are plenty of places for North Carolina to improve. Sean, you laid out a couple of great ones. Sherrell just back that too. I think it's also, you look at how North Carolina's dealing with screens right now. They seem to be, even if they know they're switching or not, they seem like they're not handling it decisively. And I don't know if that's just guys, again, learning their roles because their roles are so different. But in order to play the offense that Hubert Davis wants, and he said this, and you guys know I've joked about Hubert's willingness to cliche a press conference to death, but he's absolutely right when he makes a comment that it's all going to start and end with this team's defense. To play the transition game that they want, they can't get beat defensively and on the glass. I think you can give up one or the other, but I don't think you can get beat on the glass and also let teams get whatever they want offensively and shoot 60% a clip or what have you. Sherrell, I saw a team that showed some fire in all three of their games in Maui, but I also saw a team that came out absolutely gross to start each game. Where is that coming from? I mean, I think we talked about it last week on the show. Is that something we should worry about? Now, all of a sudden, not only do we have a couple of points to make a trend, we've got a full-on, like you said, 7 games in, we've seen this team not be able to start with any sort of crispness. They're not starting with any sort of high-level energy. They don't have a ton of they don't have, it doesn't seem like whatever they're doing to start the game, they're not coming out with the same level that they seem to find later in the game. How do you explain that, Sherrell?
It's kind of inexplicable, to be honest. If I'm sure if somebody knew, they would have an answer, but it's a trend that's not just this year, but really going. The last time they really jumped on an opponent and just kind of choked them out was the Duke game in Cameron last year, because from then on, Florida State, they didn't really take over that game until the second half in the ACC tournament. Pittsburgh was a slog in the ACC tournament. They were down, I think, double digits against State in the championship game. Wagner, a 16 seed, okay. They were down big against Michigan State in the tournament. And then Alabama was back and forth. And then we've seen how it happened this year. So it's a trend that's not just this year, but goes back, now we're talking about 10, 11, 12 games. So whatever it is, they have got to fix it because as Hubert Davis said, as RJ Davis said, it's just not sustainable to keep coming back over and over because you gas yourself out from those comebacks and then you have nothing left when the game is level. When it gets 84-84 after you've been down 17, it's a lot harder to maintain that. So maybe a starting lineup change. I don't know what it is. If I had a solution that I thought would work, I would definitely offer it. But it just has to improve. That's all we know because the schedule is going to keep getting tougher, and you're going to start getting more scout on UNC, and people will see that you can jump on them early. So they have to correct that, and maybe it's the way they're playing. Maybe it's they're not running fast enough at the beginning of the game. I mean, we can throw out 20 or 30 things, but the simple solution is that it has to change, or the season's not going to be what they thought it could be.
Sean, I want to throw to you in a second, but also want to hit you with a little bit of a caveat as well. I'm wondering if maybe shaking up this starting lineup might solve some of these intensity ills that we're talking about. Don't know where you want to go with that, but I want to throw that out too, because obviously you can't shake the lineup up but so much when you're in a 3-day MTE. But now they've had some time to get back, look back on it, watch film, work in some new stuff, try to fix some problems. Do you think maybe going to a different lineup could help them, at least from an energy standpoint? I'm not saying it's going to fix the problems that we've mentioned so far, but do you think that could actually inject some of these, some fire into some of these slow starts?
I think you can go one way of completely changing the lineup, which I don't think is going to happen, where, I would argue maybe you put Ian Jackson in the lineup because I think they have been slow from a scoring perspective, and he's also offering some size, but I don't think they're going to change up the Cadeau, Davis, Trimble at all. But from a changing the lineup, Drake played well. I think that was probably the biggest ray of sunshine that came out of Maui. So I wouldn't be surprised if he is that piece. And then I'd also like to see Van Allen Lubin at the five spot right now. I think when Sherrell was talking about that Duke game, and I know it didn't occur in the ACC and the NCAA tournament in terms of jumping, but you see shot makers across the squad from Cormac Ryan to Harrison Ingram, everybody on that team in that starting lineup could get a basket pretty easily. And right now you have RJ Davis, who's been struggling. Cadeau been playing a lot better, but he needs to drive and attack the basket. Trimble's been shooting the ball better, but he's mostly going to drive and attack the basket. And then the 4 and 5, you're not getting anything out of. So I do think it's a mixture, changing the lineup, I also think trying to run some more set plays early on. I think we saw a lot of dribbling, especially in the first half and the early parts across the three guards. I think you see a lot of attacking the basket and trying to almost hope that a foul is called. So you're taking challenging shots from guards that are 6 feet, 6'2". Obviously,
Slider of frame, yes.
yes, slider of frame. Not putting Trimble in there because he can, he's a little bigger and can jump with the best of them. But you're making everything challenging by taking those shots. So once again, you go to that Michigan State second half, coming out of a free throw, I think it was, they're running the back door from the right corner for RJ, or they're running RJ around two screens to get to that right wing, similar to Cormac Ryan. So are there some more set plays that they can run that reduces the dribbling and just makes it potentially easier to get better looks? Obviously, they got to knock shots down at the time, but those would just be a few things. Once again, to Sherrell's point, I think there's a multitude of things that need to go right, but just from those slow scoring starts, it was way too much dribbling and way too much passivity around the perimeter, which has been discussed ad nauseum around the big man and the pick and rolls that they were running.
Stay with the pick and rolls, Sean. I think something that North Carolina could do a little more. We didn't know what UNC was getting with Van Allen Lubin when he committed. I think we saw that he was potential for scoring, had a little bit of the aggression that Harrison Ingram brought to the team last year, that while undersized still allowed him to get to the glass. I think Van Allen Lubin has shown himself so far that he can be that partner for a pick and roll for either Cadeau or RJ, just getting downhill and getting a dunk off of it if he needs to. Do you think that's something that could absolutely be one of those play calling situations, or do you think it needs to get more elaborate than that?
I know I felt watching the team, they were almost hesitant, whether it was Lubin or Washington, to go to the bigs off that pick and roll, because it almost had to be the perfect pass or perfect opening for them to get a basket, or else it's going to be a turnover or the lane was getting clogged. So, is there a way to, once again, I think it goes back to ball movement. So if it's Cadeau or Davis looking to attack quickly, can you hit Lubin or Washington in a roll quickly, and they know how to dish out to the corner? Not putting a little too much stress on the bigs and their decision-making ability. But right now, I don't think any team is going to be scared of Cadeau or Davis dropping the ball off to the big, unless it's literally a dunk from the catch right now. So that is a concern. But if they can put them kind of in that high post in that 10-foot range, and they can do something with it, perhaps that's something. But when I mentioned Van Allen Lubin starting, just because he's been a little more comfortable around the basket, and I think defensively that strength, he's been able to present a little bit more from a challenge perspective. But I don't think none of the bigs are going to be able to draw their men towards them like an Armando was.
Joey, real quick, I want to just jump in. I'm looking at the comments. And Paul Hill, I understand what you're saying about it ain't about starting, but we just talked about how North Carolina gets down 15, 18, 21 pretty much every first half. So I think who the starters are is very important, because they're the ones, usually there's not a change for those first 5 minutes. So they're the ones who are often yielding these double-digit leads. So if you can change that and get those deficits down from 15-10 to maybe a 4 or 5 point lead, then that takes a lot of stress off of having to come back in the second half, down 18, down 21, down 15. I definitely hear your point, but I think that's the reason that a lot of us are harping on the starting lineup a pretty good amount, is because, as Vaughn said, the tone has to be set.
Set it. Set the tone. Set it. Shout out to everybody who watches the oh God, I can't remember the name of the show now. It's about hockey. It's on Peacock. It's filmed. Oh man, this Shorzy. Yeah, Shorzy. Hilarious. Good quips, chirping going on there. All right, so back to where we were going before I totally derailed us. My bad. Sherrell, I saw something from this team that I'm not sure I'm used to seeing, and maybe it was just because of the nature of the 3 games in that they were battling back from rather large deficits each time. I saw guys getting incredibly visibly frustrated, and specifically around Elliot Cadeau and R.J. Davis, I worry, and this is just my perspective. This is not, don't read anything in this, just what my eyes are telling me. I worry about those two guys if they're that visibly frustrated and demonstrative about it. How much does that seep into the rest of what they want to do offensively?
Well, I mean, I think they've read everything that we've read. They've heard everything we've said. They've read everything that other people have said. They know that they're supposed to be very good this year. They know that in the past they've lost in these MTEs in excruciating fashion, kind of like the Villanova game last year, the Alabama game a couple years ago. They understand that, and so I think it's a lot of I don't want to say stress, but they're carrying a lot of weight on their backs because they want to show that, this is different. This season is different. These games are different. This is not the Elliot Cadeau against Alabama. This is not the R.J. Davis against Alabama. This is not the Elliot Cadeau who had to, sit in the second half because of foul trouble last season or what have you. They feel that pressure. And I think it manifests itself because they understand that they have a chance to do something special because they have a lot of talented players. And so I don't have a ton of issue with how R.J. Davis has handled himself. I think Elliot Cadeau, we saw last year, is very emotional. He's very hard on himself. And that's just something Hubert Davis, I think, will work with him with. You'd rather have someone, though, let me say, who is emotional and into it and wants to win than someone who just, maybe doesn't have that internal fire, so to speak. So I think it's fair for if folks want to look at that and say, that's not necessarily great. But I think it's something that Hubert Davis, I'm sure, has talked with them about, and they understand, what has to move forward. But I think a lot of this is just pressure because of how, and we're talking about last season like it was bad. It wasn't. But there's just certain moments in certain instances against certain types of teams that I think bring on that pressure. And that's what I think you see in those games, especially when they get down 10 or 15. They're kind of like, how is this happening again? Why is this happening again? And how can we get out of it? And so it builds up over the course of time.
One of the things that I think is really paramount is that this team has to be clear-headed. I'm not going to go full Ted Lasso and say you've got to have the mind of a goldfish, but I think when you're so dependent on your offense, you can't go into situations where you're mentally still worried about the last play, and that gets amplified even more. And this might be a no-ish comment from me, but that gets amplified even more when you're playing at a higher tempo. So if you're looking to push the ball, you can't be focused on what just wasn't called your way or what have you. I'm not saying that's what the guys are doing. I just think it's something we haven't seen a lot from these guys, especially RJ. I mean, there were times last year where RJ Davis looked absolutely unflappable, but regardless of what was going on, looked absolutely just invincible, and that he was going to will his team to win. That's still there. Just seeing the guys though getting so visibly active in trying to get fouls called in Maui was something I don't think, at least I was expecting to see from them. Sean, flip side, rather than talking about the stuff that was bad, I think we also saw some things that maybe North Carolina can build on. Specifically, there were some good things that you can extrapolate from the fact that they were down so much. They were able to come back. And it makes me wonder that if they're able to get that energy earlier in a game, not dig themselves such a deficit, look at how good they can be when they're able to throw a full court press on somebody. Or look at how good they're able to be when they are able to defend on the perimeter and create some disruption for the other offenses. What did you see, again, since you were there in person in Maui, you jerk, and were able to watch it up close? What did you see that you think are positive takeaways that we hadn't seen yet that they did show against some stiff competition on the islands?
Well, just going back to the last part of the conversation, it did seem in the second half when they were down, Cadeau was pitching ahead to Trimble or Davis a lot more to really initiate, I'd say, the fast break, or at least putting pressure on the opposing defense versus once again dribbling the ball up or one-on-one. So I did love to see pushing the ball up by the pass. I know that has been, for me, especially watching transition, I often don't think the guys are passing enough on the 2-on-1, 3-on-2. So once again, I think just that upward pass can quicken things up a little bit. But let's go to Drake Powell first, because I think, from his outside shooting, just seeing the ball go through the net in that first game, hitting those 2 really important threes against Dayton, and then obviously that continued with Michigan State. But to see his play, I think we all thought Cade Tyson would help from a 3-point shooting and an outside shooting perspective, especially knowing RJ coming back and then the question marks, which Trimble's obviously answered, and Cadeau to a certain point. But with Drake, with his ability to shoot outside, I think, one, from a confidence perspective, he's going to start to pick things up quicker and quicker, both offensively and defensively. It looks like he still needs more direction out there. But I think that was, to me, the main positive was Drake Powell's play, and hopefully it's not a backstep against Alabama, but that would be one thing. And then staying on the freshman, Ian Jackson. Look, I know there's a lot of things to work on defensively on the message boards throughout the synergy grades, which you can take with a grain of salt. But defensively, he's still kind of a lost puppy dog out there to an extent. But offensively, you all you have to do is go back to that Kansas game when they were struggling early. He wanted the limelight, and he has he has the size and the ability to create on his own, but also to generate good shots and hit from the perimeter. So I do think that he can be a way to decrease some of those offensive lulls that the team goes through, of just kind of playing him a little bit more. So those would be kind of two main things. And then one thing, just going back and watching the Auburn game, my big takeaway in the second half was they just got completely outplayed. They couldn't really get a lead closer, into single digits. But you go back to the end of the first half, RJ misses a 3. Van Allen Lubin has almost a wide open layup, which could have cut it to 2 with 1:15 left. And a 2-point game, who's to say Auburn doesn't go down and score 2 or 3 on their possessions? But a 2-point game heading into a minute left, that makes the game in reach at halftime, even if they do come out and hit a 3 in the second half. So I think that goes to the execution, and this team doesn't have the ability to miss easy shots and just let it roll off the back. They'll get it back. So once again, from an execution standpoint, just being crisper offensively, but knowing that, hey, if they're able to clean a few things up, they're right there in Auburn, and maybe they win the Michigan State game. So once again, looking at the glass half full, half empty, I think there's some things to be happy about, but really it goes to the freshman play in my mind, and hopefully what can come over the next few weeks in terms of their continued growth.
Yeah, I feel like I say this every year on this show, but I think it's important for people to realize that games aren't played in a vacuum. I think we previewed pretty well that Auburn was absolutely real, and they showed that. We talked about. I remember citing their Ken Palm offensive efficiency numbers and how good they are from the field. Like, they just don't miss a lot of baskets, and they're old. And then when you have Johni Broome coming out with his hair on fire, you don't. It's hard to match that against anybody. It's not just North Carolina couldn't match that. I mean, if you watch, nobody else could match that. Like, Johni Broome is a dude.
Since we were on Broome, this is a funny story. I didn't know this, but someone told me this, and I looked it up, and it's true. Everybody's talking about, why can't Carolina get a 5-star big man? It's like the best player in the country came from Morehead State.
Yes.
And do you know why he started starting at Morehead State? I'm gonna give you 3 seconds.
Because what's his name left? The dude that was there before him, that's in the league now.
Because Ty Claude, who sits on the bench at UNC,
no way.
Hurt. That's why Johni Broome started at Morehead State.
See, that I didn't know.
Yeah, so player acquisition is it's challenging. Let's put it that way. So, like, look at Auburn. Todd Pettiford is the only guy they had who was a 5-star player. I think they mentioned it on the broadcast. The rest of those guys are just dudes who are hungry and, as Joey would say, are dogs who have strong desire. So, like, I get a little frustrated when everything, no matter what, always goes back to the portal big man misses, because it's an inexact science. Could they have gotten somebody better? Sure, maybe, possibly, I don't know, but they have who they have on the roster now. So, like, it's time for the fan base, and I know this is difficult. This is just me talking, and if you don't want to do it, that's fine. But I think it's time for everyone to say, okay, that's over. You can't look at Danny Wolf and Cliff Omore's stats after every single game. You can't see what Jonas Adu is doing after every single game. It has to be more of a focus on what they have now. And trying to figure out, how they move forward. The recruiting cycle is over. It'll start back in April, I promise, and then we can all dig in and figure out who they need to get and why they need to get them. But at this point, you can't trade for a player yet in college basketball. You can't sign a player yet in college basketball in October. I'm sure that day is coming. But like roster acquisition and stuff is over now. So it's just like they have what they have, and let's all like kind of move forward.
Well,
that's just my rant.
One quick question for you, Sherrell, just because I think we've seen how much things have changed in the portal the last few years, and I always say, I think people equate what this is going to the NBA, but to me, it's more overseas basketball, just given how that system operates. And overseas, I mean, you can cut guys at pretty much any point. You can add guys up until a certain point. I don't think it's this year, but do you see the ability to add people come, the winter break at some point in the near future?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, we're not that far from it happening, and people will say, "Well, how will that happen?" Here, I can tell you. So, if you sign, let's say you're part of rev share. Let's stop using NIL. Rev share is coming in July. So, if you're in UNC's rev share, I'm sure there'll be some provision in your contract that's like a buyout, and schools will be able to start buying people out. But let's use NIL for now. Say you signed an NIL deal with UNC Pembroke, down the street from where I'm from, Fayetteville
What's up,
State,
Braves?
UNC Pembroke.
Yeah.
Say you signed a contract with them, and you go out and you're averaging 40 points a game. You say, you know what? I need to transfer because I need some more eyes on me. You get a buyout from your NIL deal. You enroll wherever you want to go that winter, and as long as you get admitted, I think you can challenge the NCAA and say, I should be able to play because I'm eligible. I've got the grades. I don't have a contract or a letter of intent anywhere, so you need to let me play. And we know as soon as someone threatens to sue them, what's going to happen. So, I mean, I think that's a possible venue. I think like many little trades, like say you're a high major school and you just don't have a shooter and you desperately need a shooter. You look around the country and you say, hey, UNC Pembroke, you've got a shooter. How about this? We'll buy him out of his NIL deal and we'll agree to a 2-for-1 with you if you let the kid out of his deal or whatever. I think that kind of stuff is, it's the natural evolution. Like, when NIL came along, we were all like,
makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, when NIL came along, we were all like, oh, it'll be cool. Joey can have a camp and make money off of his camp. That's the way it's going to work. And the second it happened, people started exploiting it. So I think it's naive to think that it wouldn't be exploited to that degree until there is some kind of real oversight with rev share or NIL, to answer your question.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate almost the 180 folks and change that are in here listen to us live tonight. We appreciate it. If you're just listening to us later on, we're glad you're here too. Thanks for making this podcast part of your UNC hoops consumption discussion. We're appreciative of that. But I'm still seeing folks in the chat just belaboring why UNC doesn't have a big man. Why doesn't UNC have a big man? They don't. At this point, like Sherrell said, play with who you have. Like, if you're still worried about why North Carolina didn't get anybody last summer, you're probably 2 problems late, right? Like, you're focusing on the wrong thing right now, and that's kind of what we're talking about is what can you do to work through this now? And then, obviously, Hubert Davis's staff will learn, and they will they're approaching going after big men differently right now as we are speaking.
And, yes, we can say, like, it's not good that they didn't sign a more, I guess you would say, highly
nobody's glossing over that.
Right. We're not saying that's not an issue. We're just saying that, like, it's over. It's time to kind of move forward. Like, I think if they could have it back, maybe there's someone that it would have taken earlier or been more aggressive with, but it's over. Just like it is with any other recruitment, you kind of got to move forward with who you have. And I still think, despite the results this past week, they have a very talented team that as long as it gets in the tournament, which I think it will, can compete, because the tournament is just about who you play that specific day.
Yep.
So that's kind of where I'm at with the whole thing. Like, it's not an ideal situation, but it's the one in which they're in, and they got to kind of work themselves out of it.
And I'm not, and don't get me wrong, I'm not telling anybody how to feel, but just recognize, like, this. If we were having this podcast and we're talking about it prior to the trip to Maui, I think folks were still really excited about the way this team looks. They're still exciting. There's still a lot to watch right now. So if you're worrying about who they missed on, or if you're worried about who they're going to have next year, like, you're probably robbing yourself of some potential fun in watching who this team is and who they still can be. Something I want to reiterate, and we haven't really addressed this, so Sean, I want to let you kind of roll with this. I don't think UNC's ceiling has changed despite the way they performed in Maui. I think what did change is maybe their floor is a little lower, depending on how they adjust and how Hubert Davis goes back and tries to coach what they learned in Maui. But Sean, do you still feel like this team has the same ceiling that they had ahead of time if they can continue to tinker and tweak and improve?
To me, the ceiling's a little lower. I think your point, the floor definitely decreased. I mean, we could have been here looking at 0-3, similar to UConn, but not having the back-to-back championship. So I do feel everything has gone down a little bit. At the same time, you can put a lot of stock in Drake and Ian as being the guys that can raise that ceiling, similar to what we talked about previously. So, I think for this, they still have some. I think we ended the podcast last time talking about marquee wins. So Dayton is really that marquee win. You're kind of hoping that Auburn Iowa State game could have made something, especially for the committee at the end of the year. But at 1 and 2, now you have Alabama, which I know we'll get into. Super tough game. So to me, I'll almost slot that one aside to an extent. Hopefully they can play like they did against Tennessee, but it's really going to be the UCLA and Florida games in terms of I think competition more at that level, not in that top tier like in Auburn, Kansas, Alabama. So it's really that second tier that they need. Those games they need to win and take care of. Michigan State definitely was in there, and when UNC's losing to Michigan State, I think you know how that team currently is. So I would say Drake and Ian can still get them to that ceiling, as well as cleaning some of these things up. Not to mention, RJ Davis, the All-American, shooting high volume shots, shooting 27% from three, and really struggling in terms of his consistency. So that's also, I mean, if he can get back up, which was talking to Sherrell earlier, and you look back at last year or even the year before, he has started very slow. I think this time last year, his numbers were better, and a lot of that came from how well he was doing in catch and shoot situations versus off the dribble. Versus right now, it's kind of a poor across the board. But once again, I think just continuing to get him good looks. You saw, or at least going back and watching Maui. I mean, he was taking several just catch and shoot threes from that yellow, almost the volleyball line in college, which was beyond the NBA line. So get him a little closer and get him in better shots. But those freshman and RJ's shooting, I think, are the two things that can put the ceiling up.
Yeah, and we didn't see a ton of Ian Jackson, but he still has shown he's got microwave scoring ability, right? Even though he looked lost on the defensive end, and that's usually where freshmen are going to be lost at UNC. I saw him come in and pull some strings offensively and really make things happen quickly. Sean?
I'll definitely take him being lost on the defensive end, just given all the defensive struggles across the board. If he can, I saw him get better each game and get more confident. And I wish he had gotten more time in that second half against Michigan State, because I felt like if you get him the ball, he's gonna score.
So I think something also that could probably improve where North Carolina's going, and I don't know if Hubert Davis has addressed this yet with the team or not. But he would probably be wise to take them on a walking field trip to Johni T-shirt. I just think that, it's a good way to get out, clear your head, team, just head up through campus, focus on what you can control, and go to Johni T-shirt and check out what they've got. Because I'm telling you right now, since Black Friday has begun, Johni T-shirt is absolutely on one with the stuff that they have going on for sales, selection. Your Christmas stocking is never going to be as prim and proper, and it's never going to be trimmed the way that it's going to be trimmed this year if you go to Johni T-shirt. Premium subscribers know they get that extra 10% off the top if they use the code on the message boards. If you're not a premium subscriber, I've already addressed you earlier in the show. I'm not wasting any more time with folks that are not premium subscribers. This time of year, we got a show to do. Go check them out. Johni T-shirt. They absolutely have all of the goods right now. Take care of the Tar Heel in your life for the holidays. Go to Johni T-shirt or JohnnyT-shirt.com. I think that might be something that could bring the team together and get things squared away. Just go to Johni T-shirt and hey, let's all have a have a shirt buying session, right? Johni T-shirt, check them out. We appreciate how much they support IC, and we certainly want you guys to do the same for them. On the audio version, there will be some ads that drop in right here. But on the video version, we're still here, and we appreciate you guys being a part of the show tonight. If you're listening to us after the live recording, make sure you smash subscribe so you can get that sent directly to you on the regular when we do these shows. We try to do them live if our schedules line up. It just doesn't happen very often. We've been very lucky the last couple of weeks. When Sean's not out in Maui, he can join us and kind of slum it with the rest of us normal people. Guys, let's look forward towards Alabama a little bit. You're listening to Coast to Coast here on Inside Carolina. It is your favorite podcast. Sherrell, I saw an Alabama team that, for all of their pluses and all of their strengths, they've also struggled at times this year. I mean, they got upset by Oregon the other night out on the West Coast. I saw Mark Sears had 0 points against Illinois. Didn't see that coming. So, I mean, all the people that are hand-wringing about RJ, if you've got another All-American that'll be coming to town when Alabama gets here this week, Mark Sears just laid an egg one night against Illinois. So I think that still happens to anybody because the guys are human. First things first, Sherrell, what's the number one thing that North Carolina has to do if they want to have a chance to knock off Alabama and get a little maybe revenge Wednesday night?
My daughters have a toy. It's like a little Buzz Lightyear, and when you press it, it says you have to stop me. I'm in repeat mode. And I feel like that's how we're going to be on the podcast, in repeat mode every week. Like, they have to rebound, because if they rebound, what happens, Joey?
It triggers the offense, Sherrell.
And the offense right now, it really is their superpower. Like, we didn't talk about it much, but for as bad as the defense was in Maui, like, the offense over in the aggregate was like pretty amazing
Yes.
against some really good defensive teams. So they have to rebound. Latrell Wrightsell is going to be out for Alabama. I think they fear he tore his Achilles, which would be out for the season. He missed the game, the Sweet 16 game last year. What's interesting to me, aside from rebounding, is that R.J. Davis and Sears are kind of is very similar. They were both, preseason Player of the Year types. They are both very high in the odds for the Wooden Award preseason. Returning guards, fifth-year guards who had tremendous seasons last year, who were All-Americans last year, and just have come out of the gate struggling a little bit. I mean, Sears' shooting is just as bad. Actually, his two-point shooting is worse than RJ's, and his three-point shooting is about the same. They're both at like 27, 28% from three. The worry with both of those, for both of the teams, I think Alabama is looking the same way, UNC is looking the same way, is that it's just a matter of time before one of those two guys erupts, and you just don't want it to be against your particular team. So I would say rebounding and then continuing to make it tough for Sears, because while Alabama has a lot of other pieces, young pieces, guys who are contributing more this year than they did last year, Sears is still the guy on that team who can kind of take them over the top. So I would say rebounding and then just doing their best to keep him minimized from an offensive standpoint.
Some statistics of note about Alabama that will be specifically interesting to folks that are listening to or watching this show. Cliff Amori, 17.6 minutes per game. He's averaging just under 8 points and just over 6 rebounds a game. Jaron Stevenson, 15.8 minutes a game, 5.3 points, 3.6 rebounds. Do with that what you will, but I do think that is of note. Sean, tell me why North Carolina fans should not necessarily expect Grant Nelson to go absolutely KD, Mamba, whatever you want to call him, like he did against the Tar Heels in March.
I don't know if I can do that, because I think looking at last year's game, we talked about it previewing last year's game. Nate Oates and his coaching staff are going to dissect their opponent. They're going to know exactly what they want to do, what are the weaknesses, and then they're going to go, 100 times on that. And we saw that last year, just letting Cadeau and Trimble shoot outside, and letting Nelson be that roamer. I think they're going to look at what Auburn did, and sure, they don't have a Broome, but they have Nelson and to another extent Cliff, and I think they're just going to let those guys attack in the post right away. Probably first few plays to see how UNC is going to play it. Are they going to not help and it's just going to be easy bucket, or are they going to help and then kick out the shooters? So I think that is, to me, one of the just those first few possessions, how everybody's going to play it, or can UNC get some stops? You go back a few years and remember Virginia Tech used to test Brady Manick of just backing him down, and see what he had. So if he gets a few stops, then it kind of changes how they're going to play the rest of the game. I think for Nelson, you want to make sure he has to play defense. So is that Drake Powell starting and being not afraid to shoot the ball and feeling confident and knocking down a few threes? Now all of a sudden he's out on the perimeter and having to use some energy, and now maybe he'll be less aggressive offensively. So to me, Nelson really is one of the key matchups that UNC needs to focus on, as well as what is Alabama going to do in terms of trying to pound the post initially, but also seeing how UNC, for the most part, would fall apart after about 10 to 15 seconds of running offense, running through some picks. And Alabama's a type of team, they're going to attack hard in transition. They're a little faster than UNC in tempo, but if they don't get that initial layup or open kick out for a three, they're going to work some offense and involve you in pick and rolls. So can UNC stay tight and not be perfect, but just force contested shots, I think is the main thing, both against Alabama as well as going forward. So those are the key things. So Nelson to me is the one that scares me the most. And also in terms of Cadeau's shooting, this is a game I've been wanting to see. I know he's been able to hit some shots early. I think they're going to sag off him, probably not to the extent they did, but they're definitely going to sag off more than other teams have. And how is he going to react to that, especially if he misses one and starts overthinking? So those to me are some of the key things of this Alabama game that I'll be watching for.
Sherrell, what Beatles song do you hate the most?
Oh man, I'm not sure on this one. You're gonna have to tell me.
Help. Sherrell absolutely hates Help.
I do.
It's just the worst song, specifically with this game. Tell us why, Sherrell.
Because I need somebody. My general philosophy on this is that, I know how we were all raised under Coach Smith and, Roy Williams and the Carolina way, the closest shot to the basket is the best one. And sure, that's a great point, because then your big guys get the other big guys in foul trouble, and then, that affects how teams play defense, et cetera, on down the line. But in this day and age, I don't see the point of helping. Yes, you send Jalen Washington out there or Vin Allen Lubin out there, and you know that it's probably not going to go well for them. But it's kind of like you let, Johni Broome, you let him get his 25 or 30. They actually did a really good job on him in the second half, and we can talk about it later. But I think that's why I'm not going to bet for Auburn to win the national championship, because they forgot about him for like an entire half, and you just
how does that happen?
You can't do that in a tournament. Like, it was fine against UNC in Maui, but you can't do that in the tournament. But I would just rather deal with that, a guy backing you down and just kind of hope for the best, than doubling down and leaving, Sears and Jaron Stevenson and even Nelson, these guys who don't have high percentages, but they can make shots. Phylon and Darion Reed.
They make shots when they're left open. That's kind of what you're getting at.
Right. I'd rather a contested two than an open three because of help. Now, if you have someone like Drake Powell who can help and get back, that changes things. But UNC hasn't shown a great ability, I think, to do that over the years. So I'm in general, I'm anti-help because of just I leaving wide open shooters is just not an ideal way to play, in my opinion.
And I mean, sorry, just one thing. I mean, in terms of Alabama, that about 50% of their shots are from three, right? So that they want to shoot a high volume. They want to quote unquote outmath you to a certain extent by from an NBA perspective taking that high volume of threes. But they also, you look at their assists to field goals made, right up there, some of the top team, one of the top teams in the country in terms of that statistic. So they move the ball well, and to Sherrell's point, hey, maybe let Big Cliff get some touches and try to work in the post. and then you close out on the shooters. Because the last thing you want to see is Stevenson get going. We'll probably put a bet on whatever the Mark Sears over is, because I'm sure he'll be feeling good in the Smith Center. But if you can limit Holloway or some of the other guards, I think that's going to be the key.
Yeah, and for those who are curious, Alabama shooting a tick over 32% on the year from three. Sean, what is UNC shooting on the year for three?
30, 34, 35%.
Almost 38. They're making.
But I mean that it's a very small volume, right? I mean, you look at the first.
Yeah,
half,
they're like half of Alabama's volume. Yes.
But you look at the first half of some of those games. I think they had hit two against Auburn, 2 against Michigan State. So
none against Dayton for the first however long.
So a lot of those threes were in their comeback versus being able to hit early. So to me, it still goes to can they shoot well early on? And that number would be a lot higher if RJ were shooting better. But to me, it's that consistency which they just don't have right now.
Well,
another thing that's funny to me, Joey, too, just looking at the stats, we're talking about Alabama's 3-point shooting and how scared of it UNC should be. In the Sweet 16 game, UNC made 12 threes and Alabama only made 11.
Yeah, ain't that crazy?
So you just never know how this stuff is going to turn out. But I think you can't let Sears get warm, because we've seen it with our own eyes.
Yeah,
how he can go kind of microwave on you in short order.
I do want to give a big what's up to our guy B-Mick in the chat. I just gave him the Corey and Alexander treatment, so we're a fan. Just making an Antonio McDyess reference is always going to pop me, just because that's the era of college and NBA ball I probably remember the best. All right, so listen, let's in honor of our guys over at Congruity HR, I got a couple of questions that I starred from the chat that I think are good. I'm going to let that be you guys' 2 cents for tonight, all right? Why? Because I'm the host and I can do that. If you are unfamiliar, Congruity. Hey, Congruity might be helping North Carolina right now with some of their HR situations that they're dealing with on the football side of things. I have no idea, but they can probably help your small or medium-sized business. Of that, I am certain. Check out Matt at congruityhr.com. Shoot him an email. Tell him a little bit about your business. He's going to ask you some questions. They're going to do an assessment for you. They'll tell you how they can save you money. Hit them up. What have you got to lose? You can focus on the things that actually drive profitability within your business. Let Congruity take care of you. I promise you will not be upset that you spent the time reaching out to Matt. Great human being. Uses both his left and right turn signal indicators. Just all around great guy. So hit up Matt at Congruity HR. We appreciate Congruity sponsoring. This will be our 2 cents presented by Congruity. So I'm going to throw a couple of these questions at you guys and see what you think about this. First question, Sean from our guy Charlie Shaw. My guy, Charlie Shaw. Text me during the game. Charlie says, can Sean speak to how much of a problem it is that defenses don't have to respect our big man in the pick and roll, pick and pop, and how that limits UNC's guards getting downhill? That is a great question, and something that I think was very much exploited against Auburn, to a lesser extent Michigan State, but definitely against Auburn. Sean, I'm going to let you run with that one, sir.
Well, when you look at Auburn, they would put two on the ball, so it immediately eliminates Cadeau's ability or RJ's ability or Trimble's ability to be the aggressor, creating the action, getting downhill either for themselves or the kick out. And more often than not, it ended up picking up their dribble, they're dribbling backwards. And then Auburn did a good job on the help side, where ideally you hit a quick pass, and then you had that advantage 3-on-2, 2-on-1, but UNC couldn't make that pass. So basically, not respecting the bigs, it blew up the ball screen, and now you're taking 5-10 seconds off the shot clock, which is resulting in the over dribbling or passing and then trying to restart, which then often you're seeing now RJ or Trimble going one-on-one. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question that Charlie had. I think it did disrupt, especially Cadeau, even though he's graded out very well in the pick and roll scenarios right now. Kind of led to some of those offensive issues early on, where they're taking tougher shots. There's more dribbling involved. They're not running the set set offense or easy offense. And I saw another comment in there. I think it was Brett or Brent earlier. If they're going to play Jalen Washington, I know he had one or two and some missed threes, but look at him try to roll once again to that 10-foot spot. You hit him, and now he's hitting that, or he's attempting that mid-range jump shot, which we know he can hit. And does that get his confidence up versus hit him in the post? Unless it's a wide open dunk, now he's getting challenged, or hit him on the roll where he struggled with his hands a bit in terms of catching in traffic. So, are there some things that they can do to alleviate it? But once again, it goes to quick decision making from the guards to recognize, hey, I don't have an advantage. Let me move the ball or try to hit in the roll. But also then that secondary option of what are they going to do with it. And I think if you can put Drake in there, he could also be a guy that can, we saw some of his step backs from 8 to 10 feet and how much space he got. So once again, it'll be interesting to see what UNC does, but it certainly was a big problem, obviously, at Maui.
And it could be just as simple as Washington and Van Allen Lubin taking more shots when they have those chances. We've said earlier, it's not just that you have to score off of those. You just have to have the threat of scoring. Sean, that's a great breakdown, man. I appreciate that. Sherrell, I've got one for you, man. And we've talked about this before, but I think it's a fair question because it comes up inevitably every year, especially after some nights where North Carolina shows some prowess in a full court press. Jeffrey Polly asks, why don't we press more? Florida State last year, the press brought us back together and back into games. It's a great question. I have some thoughts, but Sherrell, I'll let you throw 2 cents at that, sir.
Before I do that, UNC also has a ACC opener next Saturday before we talk. So
Good.
we haven't
What
talked
are we
about it at all. We haven't talked about it at all, but they do start
before
the ACC season.
we have our next show. The first week of December, we're like all of us are used to.
Yes.
UNC playing ACC conference games in December before Santa Claus has even grown his beard out. What are we doing?
Yes.
Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So just FYI on that. I think so. There's two things with the press. There's two ways to do it. So like you don't always press to create turnovers to get layups. Sometimes you press just to make things a little bit more difficult for the offense and setting things up and make it more difficult for them to get into their actions. And I think the latter is what UNC should maybe do a little more of. All the announcers call it token pressure, but just enough to disrupt them a little bit. So it's not just dribble down the court, one high pick and roll, get the ball to the big, let the big, go in on Washington and Lubin and get a layup. Maybe just a little bit more resistance, push the defense out just a little bit. I think the reason for not doing what we would traditionally call full court press more, one, you kind of want to have that in your holster when you really need it. And you don't want to put it out there too much because, Georgia Tech, I think the game was Florida State that someone had referenced. If they knew in that game that UNC or saw film of UNC working on that full court press, it probably wouldn't have been as effective. And then two, it is a high risk, high reward defense. For as many layups as you see from turnovers, I think teams on offense get from breaking the press and then they have a 3-on-2 or a 2-on-1 going to the other basket. So I think that's part of the reason is that if you don't play it right exactly, you're probably going to give up a layup or an open shot on the other end, and then to kind of save it for when you really need it. But I do think they can be a little more aggressive in what the announcers typically call token pressure, just to mix it up and to make it a little more uncomfortable for the offense and for the ball handler.
Two things I'll add to that, Sherrell. One, to consider, press is designed to create havoc. If you create havoc all the time, your opponent adjusts to it. If they know that it's coming and they know to expect it every time they get the ball and bring the ball in, it's easy for them to learn to expect it and learn how to beat it. And really, once you figure out how to beat it once, you're okay for a little while. I think the thing to think about with North Carolina is they've got to be able to get stops to put that pressure on. You can't pick up a full court press if the other, unless the other team is actually unless you're getting a chance to set up on them. And the problem is when North Carolina's getting up so many baskets, it's hard to set up whatever defense you want to set up. I think something else to think about with North Carolina is fouling. When you're pressing, when you're creating chaos like that, the tendency is to foul. And North Carolina has shown a couple of times that they're unable to defend without fouling so far consistently, and I think that's been a struggle. So until they can figure out specifically with their perimeter players how to defend without fouling, without grabbing, without jumping into somebody else's space, I think it's going to be very, very dicey as to when Hubert Davis will deploy a full court press. Guys, y'all answered that admirably. I didn't expect otherwise. I just want to point out how admirably y'all handled that. This has been the latest edition of the Coast to Coast podcast. This is fun. Shout out to everybody who got a question in. I know we didn't get to do many of them, but we'll certainly try to continue to do that. We can't always do this live, but as our schedules allow, we will absolutely do it. Love you guys jumping in the chat for the almost 200 folks that were here at one point tonight. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate you guys being a part of the show. I love that. And then for those of you who aren't watching live but are listening later on, we're glad you're here too. Make sure you like things. If you don't like what we're doing, shoot me an email, joey@insidecarolina.com. Love to hear your feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. Or if you don't feel comfortable letting us know, just reach out to Ben directly, ben@insidecarolina.com. He's the general in charge. He'll let you know how we can fix things. But we want to make sure we're putting out content that y'all like because, I mean, we're not your favorite podcast for nothing, right? We want to maintain that. Hope everybody has a great week getting back on the hashtag grind. We're glad that you spent some of your Sunday evening with us. But until next time, we will have, like Sherrell said, we'll have an Alabama game to talk about. We'll have a Georgia Tech game to talk about. Man, who knows? We are fully in the season, and we hope that you guys keep joining us so that we can have these conversations with you about UNC, hoops, recruiting, what have you. I didn't make a church reference tonight, Sherrell, and we didn't even use the word variance. So I don't know what's happening. It's getting away from us. But for Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan, I'm Joey Powell. Appreciate you guys listening to us. Shout out to John Siegley for producing, to Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity for sponsoring. We'll talk to y'all next time on the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com.